once you, I had a few topics I wanted to talk to you about, man. It always interests me. But once you sent me a guitar player, I asked you about time years ago in an email, and you sent me a guitar player package. And now I got so much stuff on hard drives now, I can't even remember where I put it. But what was the name of the cat again?
I don't know which cat.
See that?
What kind of music was it?
Oh, it was old blues stuff.
Oh, it was either Son House or Blind Willie Johnson.
That's it. That's it.
Blind Willie Johnson. Pentecostal guitar player, Pentecostal church guitar player.
All right. I gotta find those files and go back over that. So a lot of times, what happens to players like myself who play, say, like in the basic band for almost 20 years, all these big bands, you know, if you're not really blowing and doing stuff, section playing is a whole other art form, as you know.
Absolutely.
And a lot of cats, the young people can't seem to play in the section, man. They don't know how to blend, how to make a section sound. There's a whole secret to getting the bassy sax section to sound like it does. You know what I'm saying? And I was young. I wanted to touch on a couple things that I really enjoy. And like you, I like pop music. I like funk. I listen to all sorts of stuff. It's hard to find something I'll say, like, I don't like that. You know what I'm saying? I just enjoy it. If it makes me have some joy, I'm with it.
Right.
I really love Sting, and I really loved your playing with Sting. My wife loves Sting. She went to see Sting. She got a big thing. I wanted to just ask you, what was it like to play with Sting, brother?
It was great. I mean, he's a really. I think it's really rare to find people who are at the pinnacle of that, at the pinnacle of pop culture, who are very at ease with themselves and very sure of themselves. I think a lot of those guys and gals are massively insecure for whatever reason and overly sensitive. And he was just cool, man. I mean, he hired us, first of all. I mean, most guys wouldn't even be able to stand being around a band like that. And we would make suggestions and he would roll with it. And he would say yes or he would say no. But his no wasn't a defense mechanism for him to give the impression that he was always in charge. He was just he was great. And he was gracious and magnanimous. He wrote killer songs. He was just a really secure dude, man. And it was a lot of fun to be around him.
I'm glad to hear that. He really presents that, and I really enjoy his music, man. And
there was at that time there was a lot of pop culture envy towards him.
Uh-huh.
A lot of vitriol. Like he would write in his lyrics about reading Nabokov, and then people would get pissed off and say, "Oh, he's a fucking snob." He has to tell the world he reads Nabokov. It's like, if you read Nabokov, you wouldn't be pissed off about that. It's just like this thing when you think about it. You'd be like, oh, he reads Nabokov too. Great. Instead, it's like, And then I remember some guy in a band said, what, I read too. Sting's not the only person who reads. And it was a completely unsolicited comment. The person asked him a question. It's like, so what are you reading now? And he goes, hey, I read, it just Sting's not the only person who reads. We just don't talk about it and put it in our lyrics. And I'm like, okay, he doesn't read. Because if the motherfucker read, he would just tell you what he was reading. Right. It was just like, I'm reading this. I'm reading cartoon. I'm reading comics. It wouldn't have mattered. It was just one of them funny things. And it was great for me because I was on the outside of it.
Uh-huh.
Like, it's Sting's world. I'm not in his world. I'm kind of like, I'm working, but I'm outside of his world. So everything that I saw it as an outsider. So when I would see events like that, I mean, it didn't affect me one way or the other, but I would read things and hear musicians talk, and I would notice, and I would just file it away. I said, what was that about? Oh yeah, envy. Okay, great. And it helped me later on to deal with other people and personalities and musicians and things like that.
A lot of rock artists, Ian Fleming, and a lot of rock and roll bands have references to all sorts of different novels and Shakespeare and all sorts of stuff in their lyrics, man. It was really common back through the 60s and the 70s for for rock music to have these, especially the English and the American ones. So
It was a different time because, I mean, they were influenced by other forms of music. I mean, Ginger Baker was checking out Elvin Jones, and the drummer with the Doors, whose name I never remember, he was checking out Elvin, and
huh.
jazz guys. Miles was hanging out at pop concerts. It was a different. It's so fragmented now.
Right.
It's like everybody is in their own little world, and you know, it's just very, very different. Like
I agree with that.
there's not many guys like Sting around.
But to me, it affects the jazz players playing, because for me, jazz, at the essence of the solos I love or the playing I love, is someone that sounds like they're singing or expressing or singing a phrase or singing a melody or knows the words or has a message to send. And I hear you and I exchanged emails about once, which I discussed the great technique of so many of these players that come out of college, but there's nothing moving to me, and I think they should call it a different music. It doesn't sound like jazz to me. It sounds like something.
Well, I don't call it jazz. I call it improv, because that's what they study. They don't study jazz. They study improv. They study improvisational techniques. And they don't know a whole lot of jazz. But they know a lot of structure. They can kill some structure.
I see.
But if you wanted them to play something like Straighten Up and Fly Right, or Tain't What You Do, But the Way Hot You Do It, or something, they would struggle with that in a mellow tone, struggle, because that's not what they studied. It's not what they like. They don't like it. They like, negotiation of chord structure through, a scalic or arpeggiated harmonic approach. That's the thing that they're actually into. And that's what the difference is. I mean, the more natural musicians play popular music now, profit margin is incredible if you can get with the right person and hit the right thing. I meet a lot of musicians who would have become jazz musicians were there no pop music or country music. And it's clear why they go in the direction that they go in. And most of them do very, very well. And a lot of the people who play jazz now are more technocratic in their thinking than musical. And it's not fair to blame schools. It's just how the dudes are. That's just how they are. I mean, it started, hell, as soon as Charlie Parker died. I mean, there were people who were in the Charlie Parker. I mean, my dad was one of those guys. He was into, the thing he loved the most about jazz was the complication. And then as he aged, he started to appreciate it on a grander scale. I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't like jazz at all. And I think one of the reasons I didn't like it is because all of the musicians were impressed with complication, and I was an R&B sax player. And I'm like, do I really want to sit around and practice for 2 months to learn how to play giant steps, or 6 months to impress 20 musicians, nodding their head in approval in a room? Like, that's the end goal? Because I already know there's not a human being in the world that's not a musician who really wants to hear this shit. No regular person wants to hear a countdown.
You're right.
I know I'm right about that. I mean, I was a regular person. And my dad would play and say, what do you think? I'm like, man, can we turn this shit off, please? I was a regular person.
Right.
And then the music took this weird turn where, like, Charlie Parker did all these things great. Number one, often the most underrated part was he was a swing music big band saxophone player. He knew how to play in the sax section. He was the sax leader. So when he played, everything he played had this dance bounce when he played.
You dig?
And then you have all these guys that were into all of the complicated shit he did. So it was always like Coco, Cherokee, the break tonight in Tunisia, fast, 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 fast. So they're playing all of this stuff and they're learning how to play all this stuff, but they don't have that bounce when they play.
Mm.
So when regular people would hear Bird, they say, "Man, I just like the way it sounds." They didn't know what it was, but they loved the way it sounded. And then you had a bunch of other people playing, and they say, "Well, I don't know what it is, and I don't like the way it sounds." And that pretty much became that's what modern jazz became.
Yeah.
Where suddenly, if it wasn't the thing you were doing, then all of the shit that preceded it was corny
Mm-hmm.
or outdated. And, like there's this old joke that Eric Reeves told me. A little boy goes to his dad and says, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be a jazz musician." And the dad says, "Son, you can't do both." And see, the point is that Charlie Parker could do both. He could play all this unbelievably complicated shit, but he could do it with a high level of charisma and melodicism.
Right.
And that was replaced by high levels of function. And I won't say that it was at the expense of melodicism, because a lot of those guys did not know how to play melodically.
Huh.
It wasn't a rejection of melodicism. It was an inability to play in a melodic fashion. And they would just double down on their strengths and, play more fast tunes and more fast tunes and more complicated tunes and learn simple songs in ridiculously complicated keys. And because I had that whole R&B background and I moved to New York, and I would hear guys say, "Well, man, can you play this in F sharp?" I'm like, "Why would I want to play that shit in F sharp?" "Well, man, it's like one of the things you need to do as a musician." I said, "Man, I played in an R&B band for 5 years with a singer who could only sing in E and G. And in 5 years, no one ever came to me and said, 'Man, you guys need to play in a different key.' Never happened." So what happened in New York when I got there, I realized is that musicians were making rules for musicians at the expense of audiences, because audiences don't care about any of that. What audiences really want are songs with really catchy melodies and a good beat and incredibly short solos. That's what audiences want. Now, if the song has a good beat and is catchy, they'll tolerate long solos. But we created this alternate universe and decided that it was the actual universe by saying, well, people really want long ass solos. And if they don't, then they're not hip anyway. And that right there is why the majority of the jazz clubs are empty most of the time.
Or there's just musicians in there.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing as being empty.
And I always look to my wife to see what she enjoys. My brother told me a story. My brother was a classical child protege on the trumpet. We had a lot of firsts, and when you and I came up for black people. So back in Pittsburgh, there's a Carnegie Mellon Honors Band. You know Carnegie Mellon, right? At 14 years old, my brother became first chair in the Carnegie Mellon Honors Band. I tried out on clarinet several years. I never got it later, but I got a picture of him playing. Janice Wilkins, I think, was also there. She's a black female trombone player. He had told me once when I was young, when I was starting to get into all this technical stuff, he said, "Marshall, a man works hard all week at a job he doesn't like and goes home to a family that has trouble and a wife that's nagging him to do stuff. And he's only making enough money to go out maybe on Friday night with his wife. He doesn't want to hear you playing a bunch of complicated stuff and long solos. He needs some joy, and then he wants to go home and make love to his wife, and you ruined his evening."
There it is. There it is. So what we figured out is, unlike the little boy, we can do both. So we play complicated stuff, and then we play this song. And I have a whole shtick that I do, because we'll play a song like, on the last record, Eric Reeves, who our bassist, who when he's not playing with us, his music leans more to avant-garde. So he wrote this song called "Dance of the Evil Toys," and we really go out there. And the audience is like, some people are like, "Man, that was just like a punch in the mouth. That was great." And other people are like, "What the hell was that?" I said, well, whether you liked it or whether you didn't like it, I assure you, you won't hear another song like that tonight. And they'll laugh. and then we'll play a completely different feeling.
Right.
And it might be something they like. Did you like that? Great, because you're not going to hear another song like that tonight either. And it's the theme is that if we're going to play 7 songs, you're going to be in 7 different universes or 7 different countries or 7 different states or whatever it is. We're not going to treat each song like it's a vehicle for my personal improvisation. We're going to play songs that have certain kind of emotional character, and we're going to change the emotion from song to song.
Was that the same band that you had in South Africa when we ran into each other with Abdullah?
Yeah.
I thought so. Joey Calderazzo?
Joey Calderazzo, Justin Faulkner, and Eric Rivas.
That was killing.
And we were playing jazz, and the audience, being South African, they don't listen to jazz. They were like, man, this shit sucks. And you could feel the energy in the room. They were like, oh, this is. So then we played Sunny Side of the Street. And they just went crazy. Simple song, beautiful melody, repetitive rhythm.
Right.
Got them.
Right.
Got them. If we played nothing else the entire night that they liked, they got that one song.
Right.
And then they'll come up and say, man, I sure did. Yeah, y'all were okay, man, but I really did like that 4th song. Yeah. Good. I get it.
Yeah, that's funny because I was sitting beside Jackie Kelso. Do you know who Jackie Kelso is?
Yes.
Great Jackie Kelso. He's passed away a few years ago. But when I first got full time in the basic band, he was playing lead alto. He became one of my mentors. He said what you said one day because all the cats are backstage practicing Chi-Chi or something on all 12 keys or something. So I told Jackie I was going to learn Donna Lee and some other key, and he looked at me and said, well, you can waste your time doing that if you wish, but I'm going to go practice something where I can make some money playing music. And he walked away.
There you go.
Later, he told me, he said, Marshall, not all keys on the saxophone are created equal simply because of the physical mechanical aspect of the instrument.
It's true. I mean, it's just a waste of time.
That's basically what he
said. It's just a waste of time. It's like the idea is I'm going to spend my time doing something that's going to impress 1% of the population.
Right.
Is that really that important? Is that really that important? Well, you know, I want the cats to be impressed.
Right.
Man, so I don't hate the cats. I love the cats, but I'm not going to spend 2 months of my life trying to impress them when I could go out here and play for people.
That's true. But you have amassed an amazing technique. And I remember once you said that you told me the same thing before, that when you were younger, you didn't sit at home and practice hours, say like Steve Grossman did or something.
Like Wynton did. Wynton was a practicer, man. It was impressive. It was great to watch. You know, it's like I kind of really like me most times. Because when we moved to New York, and it never happened in New Orleans, but when we moved to New York, people say, man, weren't you like jealous of your brother? And I'm like, what? It never occurred to me to be jealous. I mean, I was proud of him for practicing. But I knew that was not anything that I was interested in. And I was playing R&B. How much do you have to practice playing an R&B band? Not that much. You got to have a tone. You got to deliver. You got to have an attitude. You got to have a swag. I even like strong-armed him into joining the R&B band, which he was really resistant. But he did it for 3 years. And by the second year, he was like, this shit's great, man. When's the next gig? I mean, he fell in love with it, you know, and the guys in the band and everybody loved him. The other trumpet player, John Roche, my boy, he was like, I said, man, my brother to audition for the band. He goes, bruh, New Orleans, bruh. I mean, I know he's your brother, man, but you know, can he play? I'm like, John, when you hear this shit, and he heard Wynton play, he goes, I can't even believe we play the same fucking instrument. What is that shit? I mean, so, you know, it was a great thing because John was a natural for R&B, but Wynton could play all this classical music and the jazz stuff he was working on. And I was glad he joined the band. We had a great time, but I was proud of him for doing that, but it wasn't anything that I wanted to do. And he and my dad kind of badgered me into starting to listen to jazz and play jazz. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And yeah, they won out. but it was never one of those situations where I was in a competition with my little bro.
Right.
You know, I got to share it because Wynton shared. And I mean, I'm like, man, Wynton's killing it. Not for me. And he would always, man, why don't you practice this? Man, get somebody else then. I'm having a great time
Right.
playing with you. And I was learning so much music that it just wasn't really that important for me to learn how to play the saxophone that well. And then sometime in my late 30s, I went, you know what? I need to learn how to play the saxophone. So I started working on it. But I had this whole, 15-year like well of musical understanding. Like Wayne Short is not a great saxophone player. Man, it's killing though. It's killing.
I agree with you.
You know what I mean? So, it's like by the standards of Coltrane or Sonny Rollins, Wayne Shorter didn't play the saxophone that way. So what? Listen to what he's playing.
Right.
And that was one of those things where as I got older, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna start. I'm never gonna practice in a way to learn all those 8th, 16th note patterns. I just don't even like the way that shit sounds. So it's not for me. But I wanted to have a better command of the saxophone.
You had a lot of command when you were playing Yes or No, and around that period. What year was that? I don't remember now.
80s. Nah, not really. It was getting there, but I didn't really start trying to focus on saxophone technique until like 96.
That long?
Yeah, we were playing gigs though. I mean, you get things from playing gigs.
That's true. You do.
You get things from playing. And we were playing, and with that band, man, we were playing, man, at least 250 nights a year. We were always on the road.
Oh man, that's a thing right there, man.
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky. We were having a good time out there.
Yeah, the funny thing is, all of the older cats like Bill Crow, Frank West, Frank Foster, Plas Johnson, who I got to talk to, all of them said they didn't have these giant practice sessions, but they were playing all the time. They said we played all the time. I asked Lionel Hampton, "How'd you learn how to play?" He said, "Marshall, we got up in the morning, Benny rehearsed 4 hours, and then I played the vibes after, and then we played every single night." So they were immersed in the music, but most of the guys said, I actually would learn a tune on the stage while someone else was playing it.
Right. So, I mean, that's why it always sounded so spontaneous, though. Because the problem with preparing is that the shit sounds prepared.
That's true.
So if you go to hear the same person 5 nights in a row, by the 3rd night, you're like, wait a minute, that's the same solo from last night.
Right.
But with a guy like Gates, he was just up there winging, man. It was great. I love playing with him. Yeah, even though they fired me, I love playing with him.
I wanted to get into that with you because I was in the band. I've been in the band still sometimes I'm on the gigs with your brother Jason, and we did Birdland this year. And I wanted to ask. I heard some about your legendary firing from the great Bill Titone.
It was a combination of things. I brought it on myself,
right?
Because I'm a loudmouth, and I'm gonna speak up when I know I'm right. And the lead alto player, the band, I don't remember his name, but I listened to the records enough to know that they weren't phrasing the music right. And I was all of 22, maybe, 20, 21, something like that. And they needed a sax player. And one of the guys in the band remembered that my dad used to play tenor. And they called my dad to say, hey, can you come and sub in Hamp's band? And my dad said, man, I haven't played the tenor in 30 years, but my son's in town and he plays tenor. So I went down there, and Bill Titone, I think the thing was, it's like, he thought he was in New Orleans and we were just all a bunch of rubes. So I showed up. I used to wear overalls all the time. And I showed up with my overalls on. And he goes, you're the guy? I said, yeah. He says, well, can you read? Which is like, dude, I played in orchestra for 7 years. It's like, but I was like, can I read? Can you read? He says, well, can you read perfectly? This is the Lionel Hampton Orchestra. I said, who are you, man? He goes, I'm Bill Titone, the manager. I said, I tell you what, I won't spend any of my time talking to you about managing, and don't talk to me about music. So right at that point, he's like, that kid's got to go.
Right.
And then in the middle of the first rehearsal, I turned to the whole sax section and said, y'all aren't playing it right. It should sound like this. So then the whole sax section was like, this kid's got to go. He's 15 years younger than us. Who the hell does he think he is? And it's a fair point. But it really wasn't about me. It was more about, I want to play the music the right way. And I would just assume that everybody else would want to play the music the right way. I didn't think for a second that I was usurping their authority, because I was not joining the band. It was a 2-week stint. And I think the guys, that the lead alto player was like, yeah, this kid's got to go. And Bill's like, great. I don't like him either. So Titone fired me. And I called Hamp, and I was just calling Hamp to say, what did I do wrong? That was all. It was like an exit interview. Right. And Hamp said, no, Gates, you should come back. You should come back. And I came back, and the curtains open, and Titone sees me, and he says, what are you doing in here? And he pulls the curtains out and says, get the hell off the stage. You're out. So I left. And he says, and I'll see to it, you better not ever move to New York, because I'll see that you never work in New York again. I was already in New York. I was living in New York. But I guess he just thought that, even though we don't have much hay in New Orleans, he thought we were just like, we would walk around with hay straw in our mouth and whatever it was. And I went, yeah, okay, bro. Yeah, cool. And then 2 years later, a year and a half later, we're playing in Europe with Wynton's band, and Hamp's band's opening up for us. Wow. And I said, and Terrence was in the band, because Terrence was in that band too. He watched the whole thing. He goes, hey, man, what's happening? I said, Terrence being Terrence Blanchard, for those in the audience that don't know. Terrence Blanchard, trumpet player, fantastic. And scoring films now, film scorer, composer, great. Right. And he said, hey, man, what's happening? I said, man, where's Bill Titone's ass at? And he said, oh, he's over there. So I said, come here with me, man. And I walked over and said, hey, Mr. Titone, how you doing? He goes, hey, kid, I see you doing good. I said, yeah, we doing all right. My brother's band is great. I just wanted to say hi. He said, well, good to see you. And I walked away. And he later turned and said, as soon as you left, he says, I can't stand that kid. So, I mean, had I been more emotionally mature, I really would have realized that. My intention to make what I thought was a better decision for the music would come off as though I was trying to usurp the authority of the lead alto player. Yeah. I would have just kept my mouth closed and kept my head down. So I'm saying, musically I was right, but when you look at it situationally, which very few 22-year-olds would do, you just say, man, I'm just here for a couple of weeks. I'm just going to keep my head down. Yeah, so we did this session, and we did this like party or something. It was some weird. We were playing at this room in the Roosevelt Hotel. Uh-huh. But then we did this extra gig, and Titone walks up and says, I want to hear the kid play, Hamp. I want to hear him play. And they played a Rhythm Changes tune, which was great, because that's what I had been shedding on, listening to Lester, play. Lester leaps in, and just a bunch of rhythm changes. So I just started playing all this Lester stuff. And Gates is like, play another one, Gates. Play another one. Right. Yep. Gates, come on, Gates, play another one. And I played like 10 choruses, and the audience is clapping. And then it made it even worse. Titone was like, the kid's got to go.
Kids got to go.
Kids got to go. And I understand their points of view. I mean, I've really worked hard to not be a guy like that. I would rather have a conversation with someone than to say, oh, they're trying to usurp my authority and I have to fire them. So it was a good lesson. And I got to hear Gates play Midnight Sun for a week.
Mm,
which was like one of the great blessings
right. Especially
for
back
humanity. And the baddest shit ever was that the drummer was Frankie Dunlop,
then. I remember that.
one of the most musical fucking drummers to ever play jazz in the history of jazz.
Right.
So I was basically hanging with Frankie and Curtis Fuller after the gig, just soaking in all of this information, talking to these cats.
Hmm.
You know, me and Curtis were playing pinball. After the gig, we found a pinball place and we would play for hours, but they were all talking about music. And Frankie, oh my God,
Hmm.
I didn't know such musicianship was even possible, where every solo he played was entirely based on the melody. I mean, my mind was blown. I was so used to hearing, you know, power drumming and
Hmm.
muscle drumming. And he was just like, oh, good God. I mean, so I got a week of that, you know, and then I came back to New York and I was talking to Tay and say, bro, you got to check out Frankie Dunlop. Because it wasn't like now where we got these devices and, you know, you can just type in Frankie Dunlop and songs come up. I mean, you had to go out and do searches for stuff.
Oh, that's funny you said that because I was telling somebody out there when back in my day, I had to maybe sell a few other records to go buy some other records at the used
Right.
record store. I couldn't get on something and hear the thing.
And some things weren't even in print. Like if you walk into a record store and say, I'd like a Thelonious Monk record, they'd say, yeah, okay, we got 2 or 3. If you
Right.
walk in and say, I want to get a record with Frankie Dunlop on a Thelonious Monk record, the first thing they say is, well, who's Frankie Dunlop?
Right.
So it's not like now you type it in, bam, Frankie comes up.
Right. That's
Frankie's
right.
name comes up, when he lived, when he died, which records he's on, and then you just go to one of the streaming services and get it, or you go to a music service and download the record. I mean, it's so much different now than it was back then. You had to do some
But
scrounging to find
but,
that stuff.
but that's the interesting thing about the people born around 59, 1960.